Story number 1. I signed for the money. I stayed for the mystery. On the deck of an unmanned military ship, the ocean looked like a lid on a dark jar. And something inside that jar was tapping back. A top-secret mission doesn't sound romantic when the water is black and the wind is bitter. It sounds like a bet you place with your life because you don't know how to stop gambling. I fit the profile. They told me, meaning I could be pointed and fired like a bullet, and I'd whistle while I flew. A man with the posture of a statue said his name was Ari. He pointed at the sea and said we were going down there. He said it like gravity had hired him as its lawyer. Atlantis, he said, not the myth. A base built shortly after the Second World War. A vault at the bottom of the world. And we were the combination. They dropped us in something that looked less like a sub and more like a lunar landing probe. A steel seed with a thick hull meant to survive pressure that teaches metal how to pray. The vessel shook, and I felt the outer hull settling under the immense pressure of the ocean. Light quickly giving way to infinite darkness as we sank. Nerves do not hum down there. They tighten like wire. The team felt stapled together by secrecy. Jacob and Benjamin were combat engineers, men who could make doors open and bodies keep closing. I'm Sean, I told them. For the paperwork we might never file. I know they told you not to talk to the crew, the leader said, but I got to ask, what in God's name made you sign up for this mission? The exceptionally large sum of money had been the initial hook. I admitted, truth is a coin you only spend when the lights are off. He said again that we were going deeper, all the way to the bottom. What's down there? I asked. Atlantis, what else? No, of course not. At least not in a historical sense. His mouth thinned like a scar. The Atlantis we're visiting is a base built shortly after the Second World War, in anticipation of nuclear war. A lot of rich bastards wanted a safe place to hide. They decided the bottom of the ocean would fit. The words dropped into me like stones. We kissed the bottom. A gentle stop that felt like a threat. Initiate docking procedures, he said, and I took point with my rifle. Without their atmospheric suit, we were meet the ocean would season. Looks like the pressure inside is fine. Life support is partially broken. Only a few sections still have oxygen. There is a sound a station makes when it has been alone too long. A cathedral sigh. The door opened. I raised my rifle and took the first step inside Atlantis. Emergency lights gave us a neatly decorated hallway that looked like a 50s hotel, trying to pretend it was not welded to a trench. Metal doors wore simple numbers and letters. Between them, a picture of one of the inhabitants, most of them scientists, some military. I don't see anything, Benjamin whispered. Neither do I, the leader answered. Absence takes up space. You feel it pushing. We should deal with life support first. The room wasn't a room. It was a generator him. It produced oxygen directly from water through electrolysis. No sign of life at all. I guess we're safe for now, Benjamin said, mispronouncing now as never. It shouldn't be hard to fix this. Almost looks like someone purposefully sabotaged it, but they didn't do a very good job. All right, we'll go ahead and repair the comms. We split, leaving our engineers behind. I stayed with the leader, boots careful on a graveyard of carpet and memory. Bedrooms and offices all neatly decorated to look like home. Personal effects and unmade beds. If the crew had left, they clearly didn't bother to take anything with them. The station was massive, large enough to house at least 500 people. Dead or missing means the same thing at this depth. A door marked Z9 drew us aside. Laboratory. We might check it, he said later. But then the control room door was fused shut. Someone really doesn't want to let us in there. Just give me 10 minutes. I can get through, Jacob said. We took our 10 minutes and spent them in the lab. It was a museum of rows of table and hundreds of vials and equipment neither of us could recognize. A lump hidden under a large plastic cover waited like a dare. I pulled it back and had to take a few steps back in pure shock. A disfigured being, about the size of a human, with pale, smooth skin. In place of its head, a hole with numerous long teeth. 4 thick legs that ended in spiky bones. Multiple holes all across its body that resembled gills. Multiple gunshot wounds sat in the skin like punctuation that changed nothing. The actual cause of death appeared to be a massive hole in its abdomen. The leader found papers and read, 19th of October, 1978. The runners have infiltrated Sector A and B. Ballistic projectiles have little effect. The railgun has proven to eliminate the runners. They only flee when the secular appears, impervious to all weapons. Should it break through the lockdown, we need to evacuate the station. He stopped. There is a moment when a story stops being old and starts being yours. Fans woke. It's Benjamin. I got the life support working. Don't take off your masks. Air began to argue with stasis in the walls. We reached the control room, a circular area with radio bones. The floor was littered with small pieces I thought were old wood, until my palm read shattered human bones. Guys, I think I found what remains of the crew on a page dated 30th of October, 1978. The handful of survivors that still remain are trapped. The only solution we found is to flood the station with carbon dioxide. It doesn't kill the creatures, but it seems to put them into an indefinite stasis. Our engineers are already en route to destroy the life support system. The control room runs on a backup system. We had turned the key they left behind. Then Benjamin. There's something in here with me. I can hear them in the walls. I thought it was the pipes. Then they started growling. A scream like a thread yanked through skin. And Benjamin went dark. We'll hold them off. Get those comms working now. We stacked the doorway and raised our rifles. A dozen creatures came running down the hall, more emerging from the holes in the walls. Their gills pulsated as they inhaled the fresh oxygen we had gifted to them, like fools with a cake. The station heard us and recalculated the cost. We unleashed a hail of bullets. Our weapons were significantly more powerful, able to maim the creatures enough to render them harmless, on paper. In the hallway, harm is a circle, not a line. There's too many of the things. It's already uploading, Jacob yelled. He became percussion behind us, a man fixing a mouth while teeth kept coming. One creature bounced off the wall to pound our leader and ripped the flesh from his arm. Blood is loud underwater. It screamed in the lights. I walked straight up and put a bullet where a brain should be. Every single creature froze. Deafening silence. And then a sickening, guttural growl from corridors the map had not confessed. Once the echo stopped, Each and every one of the pale creatures retreated. Whatever owned them had come home. What the hell was that? The Saker, he said through teeth and a makeshift tourniquet. Let's not stick around to confirm it. We reeled toward the airlock, planning to destroy the life support system before leaving for good. Long streaks of blood, a few bullet holes. Where'd they all go? The station answered with a sickly crack. We rounded and found dozens of the creatures, all dead and torn to shreds. At the far end, a large humanoid figure with its back turned. It was the Secular, the Seeker the notes had spelled like a curse. Unnaturally long arms ending in bony knives. Two massive black eyes over a poorly formed opening for a mouth. Red veins webbed across its body, like a city at night. It sensed us. It ripped the runner to shreds and started rushing in our direction. Jacob started firing. For God's sakes, run. But fear is a harness, not a spur. It dug its hands into his torso and raised him into the air. He died before he even realized what was happening. The Seeker gave us almost no time to flee. Time shrank like metal in cold. We ran the maze we knew for 10 minutes, and the maze we didn't for one. The leader grabbed my vest with his good hand. Get out of here. Bomb the Wensosa out of this place. He shoved me into a room and opened fire, hardly hitting anything other than the wall. Not to hit the creature, but to draw its attention. Run was his last word in my ear. A small, warm stone I will carry forever. I sprinted to the airlock and our escape vessel. I sealed the hatch. Through a minuscule window, I watched Atlantis like a city seen through rainfall. Guilt is pressure you can breathe. The Seeker did not follow. Kings don't chase coins. The trip back felt like Saros, only interrupted by the settling hull. The surface isn't an answer. It's another question with better lighting. We had uploaded data. We had confirmed existence. We had killed our own hope. I gave my mission report and was paid handsomely, as promised. I recommended they drop a nuke down there. I knew they wouldn't. People who build bases at the bottom of the ocean don't bury their trophies. They polish them. Nights since then, I hear the line between good and evil quickly blurred. Some work is a mirror. Some is a hole. I remember a good sailor keeps his mouth shut, and things had been so simple then. The Seeker never spoke, but I learned its gospel. We were never sent down there to retrieve research, but to confirm the existence of these horrific creatures. Confirmation is a key. Keys open doors. I moved apartments. I kept my sergeant telling me in a box with photos and unmade beds the sea had loaned me. Friends ask about scars. I say kitchen accidents. More than a decade earlier. I practice keeping my mouth shut like a religion. But stories ferment. Pressure finds a fracture. One afternoon, the sound returned. The exact, impossible hum of emergency backup systems, supposedly fueled by underground volcanic activity. It sang through the pipes of a city far from the shore. When I held my breath, it got louder. When I closed my eyes, two massive black eyes opened in the dark behind them. I told myself that we've awoken creatures that were never meant to be found. Telling a thing doesn't change it. It changes you. I slept poorly and dreamed of a base built shortly after the Second World War, refilling its lungs. Somewhere under us, Indefinite stasis had become a nap. The call came from an unlisted number that wore a uniform in its silence. "Mr. Stone?" the voice said. "Wrong name. Right target. There are valuable information gaps in your report." I almost laughed. Value is a pendulum. It swings over graves and makes the same sound. They invited me to a room with radio equipment and workstations that looked like the control room had been re-enlisted and given a better haircut. On the screen, a neatly decorated hallway, pictures of inhabitants, simple numbers and letters. "Live feed?" I asked. The look they gave me was a locked door. Someone really doesn't want to let us in there suddenly meant someone really wants to see in. They asked about runners, about thick skin and unbreakable bones, about airless creatures that filter oxygen directly through their multiple gills. I repeated the hymn. They asked about the secular. I said the word and watched their eyes flinch like a muscle remembering a wound. Names are the least safe things we carry. Indefinite stasis, I reminded them. The page burned into my memory. Flood the station with carbon dioxide. "You woke them," one man said, as if I had carried oxygen in my pockets on purpose. "We did this," I corrected. My only act of mutiny. They wanted coordinates I no longer trusted. They wanted a timeline without the screams. They wanted a story without a story's consequences. I told them, drop a nuke again, and they smiled like bureaucracy smiles, with patience. After, a woman caught me in the corridor, shoes soft like secrets. "You raised your rifle and took the first step inside Atlantis," she said, as if she'd been there. What did it feel like? I told her the truth, like touching a hot stove with a borrowed hand. She gave me a card without a name. "When it starts again," she said, "you'll know who to call." The card was blank on both sides. It started again that evening. Not the hum, the knocks inside the locked rooms and walls. In my apartment, in the pipes. I thought it was the pipes or something at first, until they started growling. I live on the 6th floor. Above me is roof. Below me is not an ocean. But I stood in my kitchen and heard the walls remember pressure in the sink. Water wore small pieces of what looked like old wood. I picked one up, and it read, "Bone to my skin." I dropped it, and it became harmless again, like a word said twice. The ocean was not a place. It was a condition. I packed a bag. Not to flee. Running is horizontal. This was vertical. I put in a transmitter, an atmospheric suit patch, a tourniquet, railgun fantasies I couldn't afford. I went to the roof to die in the open, or breathe in it. The city had emergency lights without the emergency. Sky bruised in the ways sky gets bruised. The phone rang. The blank card calling. "It isn't just one station," she said. "As far as we know, there's only one of them." That part was wrong. She asked if I still fit the profile. I told her I shook my head the way you do when your body votes against your mouth. "We're going deeper," she said. "Not down. In." I met them, where alleys remember rivers. A van with tools that leaned toward electrolysis and backup systems. I watched Benjamin die again on the windshield. Jacob lifted again. Ulrich pushed me into a room with run pressed into the air. The woman watched me watching. "You hold the door," she said. "We need someone who can guard the room and still see the bones on the floor." We walked below the city, through sections named like 3C and 7H, jokes told by planners who forgot their punchline. At the far end, a hatch, not fused, cooperative, like a host with a secret. We went through, inside, not Atlantis, but its rhyme. A base built not after the Second World War, but after someone read those papers and decided to make a better question. Neatly decorated hallways, pictures, unmade beds. On a table, a sheet. I didn't touch it. "Good," the woman said. "We're here to listen, not to wake." We listened. The hum told us life support was partially broken by design. Stasis as policy. In the walls, gills learned their alphabet again. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. It was a new sound, a braid of growl and something like apology. The seeker apologizing is not a mercy. It is a weather report. "Up," she said. "It's time to leave." We moved like we hadn't come, backwards, boots erasing our own print. At the hatch, the hum hiccuped. The first of the horrific creatures emerged. Smaller, thinner, airless, curious. I raised my rifle and didn't fire. It tilted the hole where its head should be, and then, like a coin deciding to be a moon, retreated. Behind it, a shadow stood up. 2 massive black eyes, red veins, bony knives. It turned around, still holding on to the pale creature. The past holding the present like a rag. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It stepped aside and let us pass. Mercy is a lever. If you don't know who is pulling it, you are the weight. We left. The hatch closed with the sound of a book that knows you skipped pages. On the street, air felt like a counterfeit I couldn't stop spending. They didn't debrief me. They laundered me. New name. Handsomely wired money. A mission report redacted into a ghost with good penmanship. I rented a room above a bar where the jukebox forgets your favorite song unless you bribe it with silence. Nights. I practiced keeping my mouth shut until my jaw learned to obey. Letters began arriving with no return address and too much return energy. Clippings about documents resurfaced a couple of years ago. About we lost contact with the base in the 80s. About underground volcanic activity that was more policy than lava. The story wanted a stage. I was trying to quit acting. One envelope held a photo. Z9 laboratory. The table without the sheet. The disfigured being absent. Outline present, like dust after a painting is stolen. On the back, a note. You left something behind. The seeker's handwriting, or mine. I drove to the sea without telling the sea. The unmanned military ship was gone, replaced by a buoy that pretended to be asleep. I chartered a fisherman with debts and a good motor. We went out to the middle of the ocean, where sky tucks water in. I told him a story about rail guns and runners, and a base where good and evil quickly blurred. He told me a story about nets that came up empty, and shadows that swam like words under ice. Stories don't answer each other. They shake hands and go back to work. We dropped a microphone and listened to the earth breathe. The breathing matched my own until it didn't. And then it matched the hum I knew, like a scar knows a mirror. I said goodbye to the fisherman and stayed, alone, on a rented raft that thought it was courage. Night fell, the way it falls when depth is the only sky. I spoke into the dark. I fear by delving down to the bottom of the ocean, we've awoken creatures that were never meant to be found, I said, giving the line back to the place that wrote it. The water did not answer. If they are brought to the surface, that will be the end of life as we know it. The raft hiccuped. Something below shifted. A city rolling over in sleep. A light came up. Not a submarine's eye, but something older. Emergency without the lights. The raft drifted toward it, as if death had finally found my address. I looked down and saw hallways, pictures, doors with simple numbers. The light changed, and I saw bones like old wood on a floor that no longer believed in floors. The water grew new lungs. Gills winked open, pulsated, practiced. The creatures only flee when the secular appears, the paper had said. I didn't want them to flee. I wanted them to choose. The light folded, and a shape rose, patient as a verdict. Two massive black eyes broke the surface like buoys. Not close. Close enough. Are you a warden? I asked the dark. Or a citizen? It let out another growl, a sound I now heard as grammar. I understood one word, stay. Not a command, a covenant. Some prisons keep the world safe by staying locked from the inside. I can help, I said, lying kindly. Drop a nuke. The ocean did not say, and yet the thought arrived with a stamp. Nukes are hammers we call punctuation. This needed a librarian. Behind me, a Coast Guard light looked for a story to write down. The seeker sank the way a closing eye forgives a room. I let them find me and named the night weather. The report I gave was classified until the end of time by men who think time is a cabinet, in bed after. I tried a new prayer. May the doors we cannot open never learn our names. I dreamt Atlantis had sidewalks and a bar where Ulrich kept run, polished like a trophy. Jacob laughed without a chest. Benjamin fixed life support with patience. Morning. A message on my mirror in condensation. We did this. And under it, a second line. We can undo it. The handwriting looked like steam trying on bones, so I am telling you, neighbor, listener, good sailor, gambler with your own breath. A good sailor keeps his mouth shut until the ship is on fire. Consider this the alarm. If you ever hear knocks inside the locked rooms and walls where no walls should speak, if the air tastes like electrolysis, if emergency lights find you without a switch, remember, pressure is just a promise, not yet collected. Do not wake what sleeps. Do not starve what guards. Leave Atlantis under pressure, and it will leave you above it. And if you cannot, if curiosity is a tide, and you are a stone, go with a thick hull, an atmospheric suit, a transmitter, someone you trust can switch off. Take a story you are willing to finish. Carry the word run, where your heartbeat keeps it loaded. When the seeker steps aside, thank the prison for its service. When it doesn't, accept the tax. I keep my bag packed. I keep my mouth mostly shut. But some nights, when the pipes remember the middle of the ocean. I sit beside them and breathe with the building until both of us forget how. The jar is still closed. Something taps back. I tap once. And then stop. Story number 2. The sea has a way of finding you when you think you're hidden. The first night it found me, I could taste iron in the rain. By the second, the shadows on the bulkheads were learning my name. By the third, the ocean began to look back. And by the fourth, I understood that this wasn't weather. It was an invitation. I'll say what I can without losing myself again. The water had been flat for days, a dull sheet under a low sky. We worked in silence. Men with routines burned into the joints. We were out for almost a week, I think, routine run, just like we had done 1,000 times. No omens, no whispers, just the kind of boredom that feels like safety until it shatters. We hauled the nets, guts and scullies, and the stink of money. And then the deck jumped under my boots. There was something big in one of the nets, heard a big thump when it hit. I remember the way the gulls quieted. A sudden hush, like a room realizing a stranger has walked in and locked the door. We crowded around the black shape. Turns out, it was a damn coffin. Not driftwood, not joke. A box that had crossed water to find us, like a letter sealed in salt. The first mate cursed. The captain smiled the way greedy men smile at storms. And the rest of us pretended our spines weren't turning to ice. It wasn't just the weight of it. It was intention. Chains had been wrapped in a sailor's fury, tangled and doubled back, a rust-bitten oath hammered shut. And along the lid, someone had written something with a knife and too much time, had a bunch of nonsense carved into the top and sides of the wood. Wasn't any kind of language I'd had ever seen. We stared, each of us pretending we hadn't felt the same thought slide in like a tide. Some doors are closed because someone survived what's behind them. Hank wanted it gone. So did I. We said we should throw it overboard, but the captain's eyes were already lit with found fortune, the kind of light that makes men deaf. He clapped Tommy on the shoulder, called for bolt cutters, and told us to keep our courage where everyone could see it. I felt the ship lean, as if even the hull wanted distance. That night, the sky broke open. I dreamed in salt and black wind. Fish came down like ruined confetti, bellies torn, eyes blind, the storm painting the deck with their rot. I woke with my throat raw and my hands already moving. The hatch to the deck yawned like a mouth. They were up there, Captain and Tommy, ready to make themselves useful to the wrong thing. I told them no. I told them we don't open doors that open us back. They laughed and called it fear by its prettier names. Caution, superstition, fatigue. They cut and cut until the chains let go with the sound of old bones giving out. Nails took crowbars and still argued. The lid held the way a prayer holds until the last syllable slips. The smell, when it finally yielded, was not death. It was arrival. Hank leaned in first. Poor bastard. Curious in the way a flame is curious about paper. He gagged and turned away. And in that turn, the world didn't make sense anymore. I saw his face twice, the one beside me and the one on a body in the box. The skin too clean, too recent, like a cruel copy. My mind crawled backward, trying to get smaller than the moment. It didn't work. We strapped the lid again, because that's what people do when reality refuses to agree. We pretend the undone can be undone. We put ratchet straps where nails had been, as if polyester could bargain with an ocean that had already chosen its price. No one prayed out loud. I think we were saving breath. The sunrise came wrong, red and swollen, drawing a line under everything we were about to lose. We worked like we were still us, tossing nets into silence and pulling back less than silence. I ate. I lay down, and the dream returned as if the first had only been a rehearsal. Bodies in the water, stacked so tight the sea had to slip between their ribs. Eyes missing, mouths open to a sound I couldn't hear because the wind had decided screaming belonged only to the living. I woke again because someone else did the screaming for me. Rain scissored the air. I hit the ladder wrong, and pain bloomed hot in my ankle. But fear outran it. On deck, the straps were already off. Dark water running through the seams of everything. Hank was on his knees. The box was no longer a container. It was a doorway, with patience. What came up wasn't a man. It was the sea remembering shapes. Shells embedded like coins in a god's skin. Seaweed garlanded along its collarbones. And eyes, too many, blinking out of time, counting us. It lifted, fluid as thought, and stood before Hank. He tried for a sound, and Tommy, faithful to the wrong captain, cut the sound out of him. Blood met rain and hurried to the rails, eager to be home. The thing accepted Hank the way water accepts a thrown knife, without discussion. One moment, there were edges. The next, there was only depth. The captain and Tommy stared like parishioners, and then the knives came out again, and devotion got ugly. They harvested their sight the way fools harvest proof, and offered the world to the thing in two trembling hands. Afterward, they walked off the edge as if gravity were an usher leading them to their pew. I ran. I am not ashamed of that. I locked the door and found the gun and told the barrel the truth 12 times without letting it answer. At noon the next day, I tested the deck, carried food like a thief, and felt watched by 1,000 pupils that didn't belong to anything human. At night, the porthole grew faces. Water made them gentle. Rot made them honest. I learned to cover the window. If you're waiting for comfort, there isn't any. Only this: some coffins are thrown into the sea not to lose them, but to keep the world from finding what's inside. We pulled one back, and it learned our names. The hardest part wasn't the hunger. It was the listening. Silence on a boat isn't silence. It's a crowded room you can't see. I learned that a voice made of salt doesn't need a mouth to speak. I learned that fear is patient and wears your routine like a mask. And I learned that the ocean keeps the receipts. I rationed light like I rationed food. I kept to the bunk, the gun across my knees, and the door wedged with a toolbox that still smelled like machine oil and old bread. I told myself that if I could make it through the long stretches between footfalls, I could make it through anything. Then the footfalls stopped, and the world grew quieter. And that was worse. I would hear it whispering, like it was calling to me. Not from the deck, or the hatch, or the coffin, but from the places water waits. The drain, the porthole, the tremor in the screws. The ship carried the syllables like a nervous messenger who didn't dare open the sealed envelope. I tried to pray, but prayer requires a name, and what I had was only a direction. I held the revolver so long, my hand forgot what empty felt like. Those were the hours I refused to count. The muzzle of the gun pressed to my temple, because pressure was a kind of promise, and promises are louder than fear. In that private court where thoughts argue, I kept finding the same verdict. If it opened my door, I would not be standing to greet it, telling myself to pull the trigger. I bargained with seconds that had learned how to stretch. Sometimes, the voice thinned to a thread I could nearly ignore, and it was speaking to me, like someone practicing grief in another room. Then, I couldn't understand the language, but I knew it was older than the charts and deeper than the hull. No words. Really, just shapes that felt like orders. I told the gun the truth, and the gun told me the truth back. There are worse endings than endings. When strength came, it arrived in small errands. A few times, I would look out, count 3 breaths, and step to the tiny glass circle the yard had cut into steel. A few times, I would look out again, because repetition makes lies softer. Through the port, a whole of my quarters. The world wasn't sky and horizon anymore. It was just below the water, an aquarium of warps and flickers, so I could see the backs of fish like drifting knives, the light shredded into ribbons, the color of old emeralds. I pressed my forehead to the cool rim and let the sting of salt remind me I was awake. That's when I noticed the darker shapes, the ones that didn't ride the current so much as refuse it. Tommy and Captain would be out there looking in at me, their cheeks sloughed to yellow rinds, their hollow gazes cleaned of judgment and full of assignment. Their smiles were lessons in the physics of surrender. They did not knock. They did not fog the glass. They simply waited. Teachers without bells. On one pass, the captain lifted his hand. His fingernails had gone clear with death, but he tried to make them useful anyway. He dragged them across the pane, and they break right off. Little moons shearing into the water, and for one warped instant, I felt a pity so sharp it leaned toward love. Then the currents took the crescents and rolled them away like chips from a winning table, and pity went with them. I covered the window after that, because mercy has a way of turning into invitation when you're tired. Days, or the idea of days, bled into each other, and I used the meals to mark the shape of staying alive. I learned the boat by taste: rust, oil, panic, rain. I learned the voice by weather. When the hull groaned, it drifted. When the sea flattened, it sharpened. It wanted one thing: participation, the kind of obedience that ends with a man removing himself from the sum of men. When they finally came, I ignored them, because hope sounds so much like a trick once you've been practiced on. "Coast Guard," they said, but the box had already taught me that titles don't guarantee mercy. Boots on metal, commands, the heavy courtesy of a ram on a cheap door. I kept the gun where it lived and waited for the after. It arrived in a red rush of hands. A forearm caught my wrist, like a mist rung on a ladder. We struggled, and the revolver went away. And I realized I had never planned for anything after not dying. They asked questions with the crisp efficiency of men who fix things. I gave answers with the slow honesty of a man who knows he's become one. We climbed. The air hurt in a way air shouldn't. I scanned the deck out of reflex and superstition. Ratchets, coils, buckets, the scuffed rectangle where we had dragged the impossible into our lives. No box, no straps, just the outline of consequence. On the cutter, a medic found my pulse and looked relieved, as if my heart belonged to him and had been lost in the wrong pocket. Someone gave me water. Someone else wrote numbers on a clipboard to prove time had happened. From the rail, I watched our boat get smaller and thought of it as a mouth chewing a name. I wanted to ask them to turn around and look for the thing I couldn't stop seeing, but the word for it wouldn't come, and maybe that was mercy, too. Later, in the room, with the soft lamp and the recorder and the man who wanted me to call him by his profession, I tried to set the story down where it wouldn't bite. He listened like a good wall, honest and steady, and I could feel him measuring whether walls should bleed. I told him about the nets, the lid, the eyes, the offering, the waiting. I told him about the glass and the fingernails and the way grief can learn to breathe underwater. I told him the feast wasn't over just because the table had been cleared. He said words like trauma and delusion, the way a priest says amen, faithful and practiced. I didn't argue. I'm not sure we were speaking about the same ocean. His job was to keep me from drowning on dry land. Mine was to remember what the water had asked for, and how easily men had given it. If you need a lesson, take this one. Coffins are not always for the dead. Sometimes they are for the living, to keep them from opening the wrong room with the wrong key. We pulled a room out of the sea and hung our greed on its handle. The sea was patient. It learned our names. It is still learning, somewhere without rails. And when I sleep, on the rare hours I would hear it whispering like it was calling to me. I wake with the taste of brine and the pressure of the muzzle of the gun pressed to my temple. Phantom weight, phantom metal. It was speaking to me again in the port, a hole of my quarters that isn't there anymore. And in the drift behind my ribs, there's a storm coming that isn't a storm. Not weather, not season. A gathering. The kind that asks a world a question and accepts only one answer. If the box found us once, it can find us again. Memory isn't a map. It's a tide. When it goes out, it drags pieces of you with it. When it comes in, it brings back what you didn't want to name. Men like me call that survival until we're asked to speak. Then we call it proof. I will not pretend heroics. Everything after that is a blur. A smear of metal noises, salt on my tongue, and the kind of light that makes you squint like you owe the day money. I remember the Coast Guard voices before faces, the thump of boots finding their rhythm on my deck, the shape of authority moving through a place that had forgotten the word. They were shouting for me, and I told my fear that voices cut from cloth and badges could still be puppets. I thought it was just that damn thing playing a trick in a new register, a fresh mask over the same old appetite. I held still and let doubt sit in my chest like ballast. I wasn't having it. Not the promises, not the commands through the door. Then impact. Decisive as a verdict, they busted in the door, and the room bloomed with movement. Hands trained for rescue can feel like capture when your trust is waterlogged. A wrist on mine, a twist, a sudden emptiness where the weight had lived. They wrestled the gun away, and I finally let go, not of the weapon, but of the idea that I was the last hinge holding the world shut. I don't think I had slept in days. And the body keeps its own minutes. The medic's question marks were warm palms against my neck. Names were offered. I kept mine like a shell in my mouth, rough and private. On the climb out, my eyes found the rectangle of deck where the straps had kissed the wood. You said they didn't find the coffin. I had already learned that truth visually. That is correct. The absence sat there, heavier than any crate. God knows what we did, setting that damn thing loose. The phrase anchored itself behind my teeth. I did not say it out loud, because confession feeds certain gods. I only watched the distance fill with weather and felt the boat shrink down to a word that hurt to pronounce. They put me in a room where air behaved, where water didn't constantly rehearse its argument. A chair, a table, a man with careful eyes and a red light on a small machine. He cued me like a conductor of fallen symphonies, and I tried not to make music of it. I said what I remembered and refused to decorate it. I hope I don't have to see it again, I told him, and heard how small hope sounds when it knows it's lying, when the recording blinked its small consent. The man spoke into the quiet with professional cadence, as if closing a rite. This ends the interview. He added the parts that belong to his trade. My professional opinion is that the patient believes the story he is telling. He is highly delusional, still speaking of continued dreams and a coming great flood. He didn't look unkind saying it. He looked like a lighthouse that had learned to be skeptical of ships. I recommend intensive therapy. I didn't argue, as well as institutionalization. No argument there either, until rehabilitated. As if the ocean were a stain you could lift with patience and the right solvent. He clicked the stop button. This is the end of this tape. I watched the reel finish its little journey and settle. Somewhere not far from us sat their still bice, with other storms pressed thin inside them. The man wrote something steady on paper and stacked it on other paper. He said he would listen to more. He said, "I'll update when I find any." The sentence trailed where sentences sometimes do when they approach the edge of belief. I slept in a bed that held still. The room had only one window, and it faced land. I dreamed geometrically, squares that refused to be circles, lines that turned back from horizons. The voice, if it was a voice, took the night off, and in the morning I missed it the way a bruise misses pressure. At breakfast, the orderly asked me if I preferred coffee or tea. I chose water out of respect. Doctors, I learned, ask to rate pain from 1 to 10. I told them the number changed with the tide. They smiled like men who would give me better numbers soon. I kept my own math. The continued dreams were smaller when I stared at the ceiling and larger when I closed my eyes. The coming great flood was not weather, but arithmetic, a sum that wanted more addends if you need this to end like a lesson. I have only a warning to offer. The sea keeps what it wants, and sometimes what it wants is a witness. When men with clipboards take down the witness, they protect him from the water by naming the water a thought. That may be mercy. It may also be a trick. Either way, I am here. The box is not. And the ocean is the kind of listener who never interrupts. If a day arrives when a fisherman somewhere pulls up weight that is not fish, when the Coast Guard comes for the story after, when a tape rolls and a red pinprick watches, remember this: coffins are promises made to distance. Breaking them shortens the world, and the world is already too small for certain eyes. When the man with careful eyes stood to leave, he paused in the doorway, the way sailors pause at the rail. And for a beat, I thought he might ask me whether faith or fear kept me alive. He didn't. He only said they'd bring me back intensive therapy and quiet. I nodded, because some rituals deserve their shape, even if they're performed out of tune. And if this ends the interview, it does not end the sea. Story number 3. I don't remember deciding, only the hush of my own breath and the way resolve hardens like ice when you face a threshold you can't name. The cave didn't invite me. It measured me. The dark wasn't empty. It was a will. Listening for a slip of doubt, I told myself I'd mapped worse, but the truth was simpler. I needed a reason to keep breathing. Somewhere above, the world kept its weather and chatter. Down here, you're 240 feet underwater, a number that should have sobered me, suspended in darkness by the entrance to a deep cave where a sign issues its warning. Stop. Prevent your death. Go no further. I am experienced. Advanced. An open water diver, with trips in caves that made me cocky enough to proceed, to map the unexplored regions again. Gear whispers in the current. A mouthpiece stables the breath. A tidy bargain with a vast indifference. They promise the sea won't claim me an early demise. Maybe. Then the overwhelming darkness answers my lamp's first turn. A flick of your flashlight that gives you a good view of the threshold I'm already crossing. My license and stubborn individual pride, the last flimsy rituals of control. The beam vaults forward, and my chest tightens on the exhale. Light is honest. It's the edges that lie. The rock narrows, the water clarifies, and the mind invents a second skin, a corridor that remembers every diver who mistook endurance for immunity. I thumb the reel and lay line like a prayer, patient as a metronome. I tell myself, rules keep you alive. 1/3 in, 1/3 out. 1/3 for the devil you didn't plan for. In practice, it's simpler. Hold the line, or the dark will hold you. Silt sleeps on the floor, like ash. I slow my kicks. I stop measuring courage in feet and start measuring it in breaths. Beyond the posted truth of that sign, the cave speaks in subtraction. It takes sound first, then color, then distance. What remains is pulse and math. I let the black ahead become a sentence without a verb and move forward anyway, drafting my map in a place that doesn't want names, only witness. The rock throat narrows, and I let habit take the helm. I unclip the reel, thumb the spool, and give the dark a breadcrumb it understands. A line has been attached by the entrance, serving as a passive guide into the network. I feel the tug of current, the whisper of silt waking. Hold steady. Keep the mind small. Ahead of me, the plan is to extend deeper into the network of caves. A vow that tastes like metal the moment I bite down on it. I test the tension, glance back at the clean geometry of my own bubbles, and commit to the next breath. The rule is simple enough to memorize and hard to honor. The line is the promise you make to the surface. Lose the promise, and the dark writes the rest, because should you lose it, there is no calling for help, no turning back, no hope. You'll get trapped, panic, and inevitably drowned. I don't dramatize that sentence. I let it live beside me like a second regulator, unloved, necessary. I move slow. Frog kicks quiet as prayer, keeping the water flat, the floor asleep. Do not bloom the silt. Do not feed the blind storm. The passage breathes. Stone in, water out, and I match its cadence. My beam sees only what is willing to be seen. The pale ribbon of guideline kissing rock, the chalk scars where someone else believed in edges, the mouth of a corridor I'll name later on a map no one will trust. The cave edits the world down to pulse, math, and will. I answer with patience, extend the line, and let the black accept my small, stubborn alphabet. I let the breath settle and the mind narrow to tasks that keep hands honest. The reel hums. The beam floats ahead like a thin, white nerve, and the cave's silence grows patient with me. Despite this, you keep moving deeper and deeper into the darkness. The rock learns my shape and edits it. Fins whisper, silt sleeps, and fear, useful, loyal, sits in the pocket beside my gauge. Do not hurry. The water is a textbook that hates skimming. You measure progress without distance, by pulse, by the way light shortens. You eventually reach the end of the marked path, not even noticing the slight decline leading further into the depths of the ocean. I feel it, belatedly. A soft pull at the ankles, a suggestion that becomes a verdict. The cave does not shout. It tilts. At the next pause, I run checks, rituals nailed into bone. You check your residual pressure gauge. Estimating the time you have left before surfacing becomes an absolute necessity. Numbers don't blink. They judge. I do the thirds in my head. Let the plan sit like a flat stone on the tongue. Then pocket the math and listen to the black again. The guideline stays honest under my glove, and the reel pays out with the patience I brought down here and keep spending. I sweep the beam and read the floor for stories I'd rather not star in. Silt is a library of endings. Breathe wrong, and the shelves collapse. I touch the wall, find clean tooth for a tie-off, and add my small sentence to a grammar of exits. Then you glance at the computer and feel the cave's tilt in the numbers undertow. The fact arrives the way cold arrives. Not dramatic, just thorough. Depth has grown while I wasn't looking. I accept the rebuke, adjust the plan, slow the kicks, widen the eyes behind glass. Calm is a tool, not a mood. With it, I file the fear down to a usable edge. The corridor tightens, the water grows older. The map I came to make begins making me. I ease forward, careful, stubborn, and very small, carrying a line, a breath, and the knowledge that the dark is keeping score. Rock gives me just enough tooth for a tie-off, and I let the reel sing a quiet, disciplined note. I could turn around right here and call the map complete, but the dark is a negotiator that never signs first. You attach another point of the line, checking the bite, testing the patience of stone. The path feels almost merciful for a dozen kicks, an easy glide to the surface if I had the wisdom to accept it. I don't. The cave edits the thought out of me. Floor texture shifts, powder instead of gravel. An omen wearing the face of convenience. Pale beds of dirt and sand sleep under a thin skin of water, waiting for a clumsy truth. The water carries a hush by the current. It says, "Not yet, not ready." I angle the beam, minding fins and reach, and remind my hands to be smaller than my fear, while the line attachment rides against my glove. Your tool slips free with the betrayal of a soap bubble, sinking towards the bottom like a silver lie. I go after it without thinking. Bad training, masquerading as initiative. Kick once, twice. The world erupts. One careless thrust blooms the floor. What looked asleep was only waiting. A gray blizzard rises, velvety and total, swallowing edge, distance, direction. The cave takes my beam first, then my shape, then my nerve. You're in control, I tell myself. But the sentence sounds like somebody else's safety lecture drifting through milk. I stop. Hands to the guideline. Breathe down the heart rate. Count the seconds I can no longer see. The silt feels like weather made of ground, a storm that forgets where it came from. Under its weight, sound fattens, breath grows loud, judgment grows thin. Somewhere below, metal kisses sediment, unreachable as memory. The rule returns, hard and bright. Do not chase the tool. Chase the exit. I fold the instinct, stow it, and make my palm learn the rope again. Around me, the cave is a single word stretched past meaning. Silt out. And I am blind enough to hear it. My chest tightens on its own timetable. My body tries to sprint where patience is oxygen. Your heart starts to race, and the hands want to write faster than the plan. Respiration rate quickens. Adrenaline is the culprit, but blame won't buy me a breath. Checklist voice, inside voice. Slow the kicks, shrink the light cone, make the breath longer than the fear. You need to get it under control. I count. In for 5, hold for 3, out for 7. The numbers sand the teeth off panic. I picture a calm diver and borrow his posture. I taste metal and realize the real tax being charged. The air in your tank will run out prematurely if I let the mind turn storm. So I pay attention to edges, ceiling, floor. That slight right-hand scar where line should be. I turn the beam soft, keeping the silt asleep. Give the water reasons not to hate me. I reach where memory says salvation hangs, and touch nothing. I try higher, then left. Still nothing. Pressure climbs the spine like a quiet verdict. The cave exhales and takes the room with it. I retreat back into form. Your training, palms flat, fan search slow, moving through a grid I draw in my head. Up left, up center, up right, mid-left, no guideline, no angle that returns the world to grammar. My breath wants to gallop. I make it kneel. Darkness leans in until even my thoughts have edges. Somewhere out there, the line is humming like a wire in winter, indifferent and true. Somewhere behind my sternum, a smaller, crueler voice says, "What if it was never there?" I answer it with protocol, not faith. Square the search, hold the depth, buy another minute, live inside the next breath, and only that. Story number 4. I came here to be quiet. I'm residing at my seaside cottage, the little place I bought along the shore of the Outer Banks, far from anyone who might knock, call, or ask me how the new book is going. Silence was meant to be a kindness. It became a warning I couldn't hear until it was almost too late. From the back deck, the water is usually a moving mirror. Light, breath, tide. That evening, it offered the dark spots in the water instead. Circles that didn't ripple, didn't glitter, didn't do anything a surface should do. They only drank. I wanted to believe maybe the water was just deeper in those spots. I put a glass down, told myself to keep working. Denial is a raft you build, while the sea makes up its mind about you. Rain arrived the following day, making the place cozier than it had any right to be. Most people don't like rainy days, but as a writer, I feel they are my most productive, until the circles multiplied and slid nearer, as if they had moved since yesterday and meant to keep moving. That night, when the moon laid a pale blade across the sound, something below began to hum, a tune too low for the ear and too old for comfort. The melody felt like a net. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I'd misread reflections. The back deck looks out on the sound, and out there, the breeze made a silver grain on every small wave. Even from inside, the sound of the water gently slapping against the wood always greased the gears of my mind. It was supposed to be my own personal getaway. I don't have any neighbors. I specifically wanted it that way. Privacy makes confidence easy, right until it makes help impossible. Out on the pier, the planks carried my weight the way old friends do. Loyal, a little creaky, a little pier that stretches out into the sound beneath the deck. At first, I squinted at the surface and counted what I wished weren't there. I counted 4 of them, dark rings about 20 feet from where I stood at the end of the pier. The sun was setting, and the water made it sparkle. Except for the circles of black, it wasn't a reflection. Those patches seemed to absorb the light, sucking it down into itself. I took my curiosity inside with me like a stray that might bite. Instead of dwelling on it any longer, I went inside, determined to finish another page of my book before I went to bed. The window became my shoreline. The keys became my oars. Out there, the water filled with 2 more dark spots. I told myself maybe it was a school of fish, though I wasn't an expert on the ocean and its many workings. The doubt tasted like metal. The next day broke with weather that would make any writer superstitious. The sky filled with angry storm clouds. The bay window gave me theater seating. The steady pitter-patter of rain. The rolling thunder. I should have been grateful, but the circles were restless. One of them was right at the end of the pier. Another 5 spread around it. They had moved since yesterday. My finger began to tap the desk, like you do when something is deciding for you. I opened the door just enough for the overhang to keep me dry, and took the breath I thought I wanted. Salt. New rain. Memory. The next breath carried the thing I can still taste if I think about it too hard. Something foul and sharp. A repulsive aroma that burned my nose and made my eyes water. I shut the door as if smell had hands. When I looked again, the dark patches of water had moved closer. Sleep should have been the rope that pulled me back to shore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went out anyway. The deck had cooled. The moon had chalked a line across the sound, like a teacher's gesture underlining a hard truth. I closed my eyes and let the repetitive lapping of waves work on me. That's when I heard it. Not wind, not engine, not any creature I could picture. A humming, low, deliberate, carrying a definite melody you feel first in your ribs. It almost sounded like chanting. I leaned over the rail. In moonlight, I could see the light skirting each ring, but no light filled the center. It remained as black as the deepest corners of space. The tune came from the ebony patches of still water. From them, not simply across them. Something in the sound worked at my thoughts like fingers worry a thread. If I let it keep pulling, there'd be nothing left but a coil. The pier was a red carpet rolled out for whoever claimed the invitation. I took the steps down, and my bare feet padded across the wood. The humming gathered me in. Off to my right, a few circles slowly moving back and forth, as if the tide were carrying decisions to my doorstep. What the hell? I remember thinking. That's when something stirred the surface of the water. A sudden splash in every ring at once, each with a slice of white froth in the center. A choreographed emergence and immediate retreat. They all had mirrored the exact same action. I backed up to the deck with my ears full of that strange, sad humming. The wind shifted and the stench hit again, sharp, like vinegar, the kind of rot that argues with your body. I got the door closed. I was telling myself to leave it, to sleep, to wake up stupid and safe. Then something heavy landed on the pier, a rush of water and weight. An announcement even a coward would understand. Moonlight handed me the shape. A huge conch shell, its spiral so black it made the night glow around it. And out of the opening was a long coil of pink flesh, slick, shining, with dripping water. It hauled its giant shell with long, fingerless slabs of squirming flesh that smacked the boards and dragged the weight behind. The grating sound felt like it had teeth. I wanted to run. I didn't. The first one hummed as another one pulled itself out of the water, then a third, and a fourth, rising like problems you thought you'd handled when you were a different person. Their faces, if that's what the word deserves, were bloated and waterlogged. Eyes were black, and a smile ripped up the face like a deep gash across something that had never owned a nose. The song swelled, and with it, a thought I know wasn't mine. Stay. I had the unexplainable urge to wait for the creatures to reach me. That pressure broke the way glass breaks. Everywhere at once. I covered my ears, turned, and found the version of myself who knows how to live. I grabbed my car keys. Under the deck, something flopped onto the strip of sand like a decision made on my behalf. I went out the front, jammed the key into the lock, got the door open, and heard the house behind me answer with a crash. They don't need doors, I thought. It's all water to them. The headlights lit the throat of my little driveway. In the rear view, one of them was in the open doorway, worm-like arms sliding along its frame, grinning at me, the deep hum echoing. For a second, the song almost turned the wheel for me. But the body loves staying alive, even when the mind is curious. I put my foot down and let the road erase the house. I told the story to uniforms who used words like wildlife and coincidence with careful faces. I tried fishermen who have no patience for coincidence. They cut me off as soon as I mentioned the circles. That was the moment I knew I hadn't imagined anything. The look in their eyes that says, "We don't talk about that, and you were lucky because you were fast." I sold the cottage on paper, and in my head, I started sleeping inland. Every faucet, every fountain, every bath became a thing I listened to for the shape of a note. I'm not going back to the ocean. Not for a book, not for a life. There are melodies you don't risk hearing twice. If those creatures have a word for me, I hope it translates to the one that left. If I've guessed wrong, if songs can cross sand and tarmac and suburb, then one night I'll hear humming through a wall, and the black circles will arrive not as water, but as windows. Perfect, patient, already open. I drove until the sky forgot I'd been near water. The hotel was the kind that holds road noise in its walls, like a secret. The air buzzing faintly with other people's machinery. I set my bag down and stared at the tap in the bathroom. If I turned it, would the note come through the pipes? I left it dry. Morning brought errands, paperwork, and the clumsy dignity of pretending nothing had happened. I stood in an office, reciting what I could without collapsing into metaphor. I told the police what I'd seen on my deck, and the officer's pen paused the way a held breath does before a verdict. Then another room, cooler, with maps pinned like dull stars, the local wildlife rangers. I explained the dark circles in the water, the humming, the huge conch shell, the long coil of pink flesh. They don't believe me. They nodded at the right places, while their eyes looked for a box to put me in. I signed forms, anyway. I put the house up for sale, the cottage that was supposed to be my quiet ending to a loud life. The agent asked about the view, and I said it was unforgettable. It wasn't a lie. I found a diner where the coffee was too strong and the gossip too gentle. At the counter sat a man in a sun-faded cap who smelled like rope and diesel. If the ocean could sit down for eggs, it would sit like him. I tried for a neutral tone. I tried talking to the local fishermen about the oddities offshore. I didn't reach the second sentence. They cut me off the way a tide cuts a footprint. Quick, erasing both question and asker. They told me I shouldn't talk about such things, and a woman at the far booth raised a hand as if to push the words back into my mouth, hushing me with a quick wave of their hand. The man's eyes did a small thing that felt big, a flinch that agreed with me and refused me at the same time. That look said I was not insane, and it said I should keep my distance from my own story. Back at the hotel, I lay on the bed and watched the ceiling's stipple become a topography. Sleep. I ordered myself. The air conditioner coughed, settling into its rhythm. I thought of the pier and how the notes carried in the night air had found the part of me that listens when it shouldn't. I rolled over and pressed a pillow to one ear. The room's small noises gathered like a nervous jury. A door shut in the hall. A shower started somewhere above. That's when I understood the scale of my cowardice and forgave it. You can't be brave for something that sings to you like that. A memory rose. I have no idea what those things were. The truth followed. I didn't need to know what. I needed to know how far. The next day, I bought a white noise machine and a cheap radio. I tuned between stations until I found long stretches of cosmic static. I let that snow fill the room. I set the machine near the pipes, the drain, and the thin crack at the bottom of the door. I told myself this was superstition, and then admitted superstition is what you do when experience outruns science. I wrote, not about them. Not yet. I wrote the sentence that was promised to my publisher, and then another that was only for me. But the humming is possessive. It doesn't need permission. It arrived as a suggestion beneath the fan, a color under the paint. I stood, went to the sink, and leaned in as if to drink. The faucet was a gunmetal lip. The drain was a small, dark circle. I stared into it and remembered the way those patches seemed to absorb the light. I turned the radio louder until the hiss made a wall. I left the room and found a park that had nothing to do with boats. Children played. A man threw a ball for a dog that had no fear of water. I sat on a bench and worked on the math of distance. How many miles inland until a song like that thins out, loses its confidence, becomes only a superstition told by new residents unused to the ways of the ocean? There isn't a number. There is only the willingness of the listener. At night, I dreamed efficiently. Doors, frames, worm-like arms sliding along wood, a grin like a deep gash where a face should make sense. I woke with the shape of the huge conch shell in my head, like a borrowed helmet. I made coffee and tasted vinegar in a cup that should have been clean. I dumped it in the sink and watched it spiral, the brown liquid coiling into something more than itself. I shut my eyes and said out loud, "Stop." The sound of the word embarrassed me. I called the agent to hurry the listing. I told myself again, I haven't returned to it since. That sentence should have felt like safety. It felt like a dare. I understood then that the ocean is not the problem. I'm never going near the ocean again. Yes, but the ocean, like any stage, can move. Lakes borrow, rivers remember, pipes participate. The world is cleverly plumbed. I went back to the diner and sat where the fisherman had sat. I ordered what he had ordered and waited like a bad actor for someone to notice. They didn't. So I left a note with my number under the salt shaker and the single word, humming. That afternoon, a message blinked on my phone from a number that didn't want to be known. It said, "Don't talk about such things. No hello, no goodbye, just the rule." I drove past the edge of town, where the land forgets its manners. There was a yard full of broken motors, and a boat propped up on cinder blocks like a surgery that never ended. An older woman watered tomatoes from a can that had once held peaches. I asked if she knew the fisherman with the sun-faded cap. She looked at my hands, and I realized they were shaking. She said, yes, and then said nothing else. The sound the water made hitting the soil was soft enough to be called kind. I asked if she'd ever heard a tune at the shore that wasn't a tune. She said, "You didn't hear anything?" And that was mercy. On my third night inland, I dreamed without pictures, only a feeling, like being pulled gently by the sleeves toward a door I hadn't noticed. I woke to a quiet so clean, it felt deliberate. I held my breath until I could hear the air conditioner again. Then, faintly, the radio, still tuned to nowhere, poured its static like sand. Beneath it, as thin as an apology, a line of humming traced itself through the room. I packed without turning on the light. I took the stairs. In the lobby, the night clerk looked up with the particular interest of someone bored into omniscience. Outside, the parking lot was a flat, dark plate, and the drain by the curb caught the street lamp and made a small, patient circle. I walked to the car and knew without ceremony that I would keep walking like this for a while, to this day or longer, carrying the rule, the radio, the refusal. What did they want? I don't know what I've witnessed, and a part of me wants to keep it that way. But there are instincts that write themselves in permanent ink. One of them says the song wasn't meant for me. I was an accident, a one that got away. Another says something tells me I'd hear humming again if I got close enough to any body that remembers being sea. So I won't. I don't dare. I'll build a life on high ground and never forget how all the low ground is connected. And if someday I find a look in their eyes that scares me, but also tells me that I'm not insane in a cashier or a bus driver or a woman watering tomatoes, I'll nod the way a person nods when he recognizes a hymn and refuses to sing. There are songs that make you a choir by force. There are doors the water opens for you when you listen too carefully. My job now is to keep the doors shut and the listening shallow. I rented a place so far from the coast that the weather report stopped mentioning tides. The town had grain silos instead of lighthouses, and a water tower that wore its rust like a crown. I kept the radio tuned to nowhere, a small snowstorm on the nightstand. I told myself I had outwalked a song. Work kept my hands busy and my mind obedient. I drafted chapters about ordinary grief and ordinary love. The cottage, the pier, the circles. I folded them into a drawer marked "Not Now." When the drawer rattled, I pressed it shut with another paragraph. One afternoon, a city crew opened the street for repairs. The orange vests made the block look festive. A man cut into the asphalt, and steam rose in a breath that wasn't air. Down there, the cut earth glittered with water. I stepped closer, and the foreman glanced at me, then at the trench, then back. They get a look in their eyes that scares me, but also tells me that I'm not insane. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That night, I dreamed in geometry, circles that stayed circles, even when I tried to flatten them into lines. I woke to the radio's gentle hiss and the refrigerator's low throat. All houses hum, I told myself. But that wasn't it. This was a tune that remembered me. It didn't come from the radio. It came from below. I went to the sink and stared at the small, dark mouth of the drain without touching the handle. I heard the first thread of a note. I stepped back, like a person recognizing a snake by its grammar. My body remembered the pier, the strange, sad humming, the dark circles in the water that seemed to absorb the light. I said nothing, and that silence felt like prayer. The next morning, I drove to the library and asked for books about the Outer Banks that had been written by people who liked to leave things out. I made notes that looked like fiction, but weren't. Names led to rumors. Rumors led to fishermen. I called one number, and they told me I shouldn't talk about such things. I called another, and a woman said, "What you're asking isn't a question." I thanked her because she was right. I tried to make a ritual of refusal. When the tune appeared under the fan, I turned on the stove hood. When it curled up from the shower drain, I opened the window and let the wind argue. When it stitched itself into the white noise, I moved the radio to the floor, and the floor stopped being helpful. I kept a bag packed. I kept the car faced outward. I don't dare pretend any of this is dramatic. It's mostly errands with an extra rule. Days later, the landlord scheduled a meter inspection. The man who came was quiet in the way of professionals who know more than they say. He tapped the pipes and listened the way doctors used to. He paused at the bathroom, cocked his head, and frowned at nothing. They don't believe me, I thought. And then I saw that he did, which was worse. He wrote something on the form that wasn't for me and left without advice. I drove to a reservoir on the edge of town, meaning to prove the world calm. Families picnicked. A boy threw stones that skipped in neat, obedient hops. I walked the path along the dam and told myself to keep facing sunlight. The water wore the sky like a borrowed shirt, blue and wrinkled. Far out, a patch of brightness dimmed as if a cloud had found it and pressed down. Another dimming, then a third, arranged the way bad ideas arrange themselves when they think you're not looking. I stopped moving. The song didn't play, but the shape of it arranged the air. I whispered to the empty path, "I'm never going near the ocean again," and immediately understood how little the line mattered. A reservoir remembers where water has been. A river is a rumor with a map. The ocean doesn't need a coastline. It needs a listener. I backed away until the dam hid the surface, and the surface hid me. Back home, I called the detective again, because habit is louder than fear. I told the police the part I couldn't not tell, how the inland water had started making coastal decisions. The voice on the line did what voices do when paperwork can't help. It softened. I called the local wildlife rangers, and the ranger who answered said the word ecosystem in a way that meant kindness, then asked for my mailing address, as if a pamphlet might close a door. So I decided to do what people do when culture fails them. I put the house up for sale, the inland one this time. I began to look at maps differently, like a patient reading lab results. I traced rivers with the blunt end of a pencil and chose a town where the veins ran narrow, the kind of place where taps sputter in summer. It wasn't safety. It was arithmetic, packing. I found the spare key from the cottage by the coast. I sat on the floor and studied its teeth. Memory is the worst locksmith. I remembered the giant shell, the long coil of pink flesh, the worm-like arms sliding along my doorframe. I remembered a deep hum that echoed inside my bones. I put the key in a drawer and moved the drawer to the trash. On the last night before the move, my neighbor knocked to say the city had posted a notice. The water would be off for maintenance until morning. The relief I felt was ridiculous and absolute. I went to bed, happy to be briefly inconvenient. Around midnight, a time I won't preserve in any useful detail, the building found silence. No pipes, no refrigerator, no city. Just the crisp nothing of a world that had been turned down. In that quiet, the song arrived perfectly itself. Not loud, not even insistent. A line of humming so thin it could be mistaken for word until you tasted it. It came from the hallway. I opened the door and saw 3 shadows pooling at the baseboards where the carpeting met the wall. Shapes as neat and circular as drains. They didn't move like liquid. They moved like decisions. I stepped back and they followed. Circles becoming ovals, becoming circles again. As if geometry were a breathing thing. They stopped at the threshold of the bathroom, patient as tacks. I understood then that I had misunderstood them. They weren't coming for blood, or heat, or even fear. They were coming for assent. The song had always been a contract reading itself aloud, waiting for me to say yes by listening too long. I went to the nightstand and turned the radio down to a whisper. I picked it up like a fragile animal and set it on the tile in front of the drain. The static hissed with the faith of snow. I spoke, not sure to whom, maybe to the water, maybe to myself. I hear you. I won't be the audience you want. The circles tightened, then loosened, like thinking. The humming wavered, then found another note, lower than rooms are built to hold. I remembered the fishermen, how they cut me off and told me I shouldn't talk about such things. I understood finally that they hadn't been protecting a secret. They'd been protecting themselves from the contract. Speech is listening with your mouth open. Silence is a door. So I did the only thing I believe in. I wrote. Not later. Now. On the tile. With a hotel pen on a parking ticket I hadn't paid. I wrote what I'd seen and what I hadn't, and the emptiness between. I read it aloud in a voice steady enough to pass for brave. The words weren't clever. They were mine. The song thinned, as if language salted it. The circles began to pale at the edges, like bruises deciding to heal. The deep hum withdrew down a stairwell. I couldn't see. One level at a time. The radio's snow filled the room again, until there was nothing underneath it but tile. And under the tile, only the honest distance of earth. I slept without dreaming. In the morning, the city water returned with its usual municipal grace. I made coffee and poured it down the sink. It spiraled like water spirals, meaningless, relieved. I stood there long enough to be certain that certainty wasn't a trick. Then I packed the radio, the ticket with ink on it, and the part of me that finally understood the rule. I will move again. I will choose high ground. Something tells me I'd hear humming if I went back to any place that collects what the ocean gives away. So I won't. Let the sea keep its choir. Let the one that got away stay gone. If anyone asks, I'll tell them only this. I don't know what I've witnessed, but I know the difference between a song and a snare, and I know how to be quiet in a way that keeps doors closed.